Good morning, audience. Welcome to the You Only podcast. This is the podcast where I share books, life events, and all kinds of different psychological self help and just some personal touches that could help somebody grow, develop, maybe change their mind about something. Maybe you can learn something from this podcast that you never knew before. It is an exciting podcast. Not all my podcasts are the best in the world, but I've done several on many different authors, many different psychological thrillers. But today I'm going to be doing a book called Killing Lincoln, which was written by Mr. Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard. And Bill O'Reilly is a phenomenal historian. He's recently come out with a new book called Confronting the Presidents. If you haven't ever heard of it, get out there and buy it. It will blow your mind. You know, Joe Biden was the second worst president in our nation's history, and I think we've all suffered for the last 4 years. And we've seen such unprecedented, illogical decision making. It's just wild. But I wanted to share Killing Lincoln today because, we just had an election. Donald Trump's the president. He actually is running the country now as Mr. Biden's on his way out. And I want to share that Donald Trump has been the most attacked president besides Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was attacked more and scrutinized more than Donald Trump. And that's sad because Abraham Lincoln was a wonderful person. He was a country boy. He, was born in Kentucky, made his way up to Illinois, and that's where I'm at. I'm here in Charleston, Illinois, but excuse me, I grew up in Pontiac, Illinois. And I actually lived in the Strevel House in Pontiac, Illinois, and it was built in 1854 and 1855 by Zealous H. Nettleton. He was a master carpenter and clock repair person, and I lived there for 5 years of my life, and it was a very beautiful house. Had a wonderful, elegant stairway that went up to a second floor that had French doors that opened up to a maybe a 2 foot deck kind of area. It had step down into bedroom, like kind of like pocket bedrooms. It was a beautiful home. I loved living there. And many people at the time I lived there would come and visit just because the guy actually, Zealous Nettington, I want to tell you this. Yeah, Zealous Nettington, he died in 1857 and he had just built the house in 1855, but he had left a pregnant widow with two children. And Jason Strevel, an attorney who had moved from New York to Pontiac, Illinois, actually married the widow of Zealous Nettleton, the guy that built the Strevel house. And Mr. Strevel had the size of the home actually doubled and provided enough room for him and his new family. So in January of 1860 is when Abraham Lincoln actually delivered a lecture at the Pontiac Presbyterian Church. And it's crazy because I actually grew up with the daughter of the pastor of the Pontiac Presbyterian Church, and I lived just a block over from that church. And after the lecture, Mr. Lincoln, he actually was a guest at the home of Jason Strevel until he took the train back to Bloomington. And while Mr. Lincoln was at the house, Mr. Strevel measured his height in the doorway, and Mr. Lincoln's height was 6 foot 4 inches. That's pretty awesome, right? And Mr. Strevel was an attorney in Pontiac, Illinois, and that's my hometown. And I love talking about Abraham Lincoln just for the fact that I grew up here in Illinois. It's the land of Lincoln. I've been to Salem where he grew up as a boy, and I've seen all of his houses and all the different types of people that work there because there's people that come and reenact. And right now, I actually live just a mile from Thomas Lincoln's house, and that's Abraham Lincoln's dad. But there's a lot to learn about Abraham Lincoln. He was a very interesting character. He was not scared of anything. He was a fighter. He actually fought a guy named Jack Armstrong. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard the story, but um it's something like I can't, let me think about it for a second. He yeah, Jack Armstrong He was a Russian bear. Um, the Lincoln said he was a Russian bear that I could not put down. I suppose you have heard of Lincoln's wrestling match with Jack Armstrong? Probably not. So that Jack Armstrong belonged to the Clary Grove gang, and it was their habit to initiate newcomers into town. So they would like pretty much beat you up when you came into town. And Lincoln was tall, awkward, and was bantered by that crowd of or that gang. And some of the residents recalled that in New Salem. One of them was Daniel Greenburner. He said that these fellows would come into New Salem, get drunk, and would handle a novice roughly. And a novice is somebody that don't know what's about to happen to them or naive. And Lincoln finally wagered Armstrong $10 that he could find a man that could throw him down. And the day came, and the next day they were going to meet at noon, and they did. And Lincoln's guy never showed up because he was probably terrified that they were all going to jump him, really. So Armstrong demanded $10 from Lincoln, and Lincoln was like, "Well, wait a minute. Now my guy ain't here." And he's like, "I don't care. Give me the $10." And Lincoln's like, "No, you know what? I'll fight you myself." And the story goes that Lincoln stood his ground, tired Jack Armstrong out. And then at the end of the fight, Lincoln was so tall that he wrapped his knee around his neck. And that guy was trying to run away from him. And Lincoln was hopping around on one leg. He was hopping around on one leg while this guy was trying to get away from him because he was beating him to death. Could you imagine? Abraham Lincoln used to have to hold books out to his sides in school when he was misbehaving, and he had to do it for an hour straight. And every like 15 minutes, he had another book added to the stack. And they were big books. But he also would take an axe and practice that moved with an axe outside of school, so his arm strength was incredible. I could imagine what his jab length was because he was so tall and lengthy. Thank you guys for listening to the You Only podcast. And I'm gonna be doing Killing Lincoln by Bill O'Reilly. And like I said, he just came out with a new book called Confronting the Presidents. I just now got that book and I am reading it. And hopefully I'll do that one too because I found out Bill O'Reilly is a wonderful historian, a great writer. And he did a great job on Killing Lincoln. If you can get out there, find it, buy it, get it, go to a thrift store. They always have cheap books at discounted bookstores. So here's another story. Like after Lincoln died in 1876, an American crime boss named Big Jim Kinley he devised a plan to steal Lincoln's body. And so um he wound up he wound up actually getting the plan going. He got it all set up and they were instantly arrested. But the custodian at Lincoln's tomb was so shook up that he devised a plan himself to guard that body for the rest of his life. And he dedicated his life to protecting Lincoln's body. And that's a real honor. And things happen in our lives like different types of traumas that cause us to conform to a certain set of parameters that, we change as a person. We change our being, we change our mind, our thought process, our paradigm instantly changes because of those things. Also, I want to share Lincoln suffered from major depression and was desperately sad and suffered his first bout of major depression around 1841. Many think it was because he lost his fiancee, Anne Rutledge. He lost several children along the way, and he never outright spoke about his mental issues, but all of his friends and family, they called it melancholy. And Lincoln was known to pretty much ward off the depression by socializing and using humor to make himself feel better. I want to get into this book with you guys just for the simple fact that you don't have all the time in the world, and I'm sure I'm boring you to death, but here goes. Chapter 1, Saturday, April 1st, 1865, City Point, Virginia. The man with 14 days to live is himself witnessing death. Lincoln. He preferred to go by just his last name. No one calls him Abe, which he loathes. Few call him Mr. President. His wife actually calls him Mr. Lincoln, and his two personal secretaries playfully refer to him as the Tycoon. Paces the upper deck of the steamboat Queen River, his face lit now and again by distant artillery. The night air smells of the early spring damp with a hint of floral fragrance. The River Queen is docked at City Point, a bustling Virginia port that was infiltrated by the Confederate spies last August. Yet Lincoln strides purposely back and forth, unprotected, unafraid, as vulnerable as a man can be to a sniper fire. The bombardment serving him as the perfect distraction from his considerable worries. When will this war ever end? As one Confederate soldier will put it, the rolling thunder of the heavy metal began at 9 p.m. Once the big guns destroyed the Confederate defenses around Petersburg, the Union Army, Lincoln's army, will swarm from their positions and race across no man's land into the enemy trenches, hell bent on capturing the city that has eluded them for 10 months. What happens after that is anyone's guess. In a best case scenario, Lincoln's general in chief, Ulysses S. Grant, will trap Confederate Robert E. Lee and his army inside Petersburg, forcing their surrender. This is a long shot, but if it happens, the 4-year old American Civil War will be over, and the United States will be divided no more. And this is why Abraham Lincoln is watching the battlefield. But Marse Robert Master has rendered in Southern parlance has proven himself a formidable opponent time and time again. Lee plans to escape and sprint for the North Carolina border to link up with another large rebel force. Lee boasts that the Army of Northern Virginia can hold out forever in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where his men will conceal themselves among the ridge of thickets. There are even bold whispers among the hardcore Confederates about shedding their gray uniforms for plain civilian clothes as they sink under the cover to fight guerrilla style. The Civil War will then drag on for years, a nightmare that torments the president. Lincoln knows that many citizens of the North have lost their stomach for this war, with its modern technology like repeating rifles and long range artillery that have brought about staggering losses of life. Anti Lincoln protests have become more common than the battles themselves. Lee's escape could guarantee that the Northern states rise up and demand that Lincoln fight no more. The Confederates, by default, will win, making the chances of future reunification virtually non existent. Nothing scares Lincoln more. He is so eager to see America healed that he has instructed Grant to offer Lee the most lenient surrender terms possible. That right there tells you what kind of man Abraham Lincoln was. He didn't want to hold him for war crimes or anything. He wanted us to be a loving country again, and I find that to be admirable. There will be no punishment of Confederate soldiers, no confiscation of their horses or personal effects, just the promise of a hasty return to their families, farms, and stores where they can once again work in peace. In his youth on the western frontier, Lincoln was famous for his amazing feats of strength. He once lifted an entire keg of whiskey off the ground, drank from the bungle, and then, being a teetotaler, spit the whiskey right back out. An eyewitness swore he saw Lincoln drag a 1,000-pound box of stones all by himself. So astonishing was his physique that another man unabashedly described young Lincoln as a cross between Venus and Hercules. But now Lincoln's youth has aged into a landscape and contours his forehead and sunken cheeks a roadmap of despair and broadening. Lincoln's strength, however, is still there, manifested in his passionate belief that the nation must and can be healed. He alone has the power to get it done, if fate will allow him. Lincoln's top advisor tells him assassination is not the American way, but he knows he's a candidate for that martyrdom. His guts churn as he stares out into the night and rehashes and second guesses his thoughts and actions and plans. Last August, Confederate spies had killed 43 people at City Point by exploding an ammunition barge. Now at a rail thin 6'4" with a bearded chin and a nose only a caricaturist could love. Lincoln's unmistakable silhouette makes him an easy target should spies once again lurk nearby. But Lincoln is not afraid. He is a man of faith. God will guide him one way or another. On this night, Lincoln calms himself with blunt reality. Right now, the most important thing is for Grant to defeat Lee. Surrounded by darkness, alone in the cold, he knows that Grant surrounding Lincoln and crushing the will of the Confederate army is all that matters. Lincoln heads to bed long after midnight, once the shelling stops and the night is quiet enough to allow him some peace. He walks below decks to the stateroom. He lies down. As so often happens when he stretches out his frame in a normal sized bed, his feet hang over the end, so he sleeps diagonally. Lincoln is normally an insomniac on the eve of battle, but he is so tired from the mental strain of what has passed and what is still to come that he falls into deep sleep state. What he sees is so vivid and painful that when he tells his wife and friends about it 10 days later, the description shocks them beyond words. The dream finally ends as day breaks. Lincoln stretches as he rises from bed, missing his wife back in Washington, but also loving the thrill of being so close to the front. He enters a small bathroom where he stands before a mirror and water basin to shave and wash his hands and face. Lincoln next dons his trademark black suit and scarf, a quick breakfast of hot coffee and a single hard boiled egg, which he eats while reading a thicket of telegrams from his commanders, including Grant, and from politicians back in Washington. Then Lincoln walks up to the top deck of the River Queen and stares off into the distance. With a sigh, he recognizes that there is nothing more he can do right now. It is April 2nd, 1865. The man with 13 days on Earth is pacing. The man with 13 days left on Earth is pacing. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed that chapter of Killing Lincoln. You can pick Killing Lincoln up at Barnes and Noble for $9.99. You can pick it up on eBay for $5. Get out there and pick it up. It's a great read. I'm serious, it won't let you down. I wanted to share too that Abraham Lincoln was once asked if he had 8 hours to cut down a tree, how would he do it? Lincoln replied, I would spend 6 hours sharpening my axe and 2 hours devising my plan of action. So he spent 6 hours creating a plan. I found that to be very important. That's something in life that we need to think about. The more time you spend on the plan, the less time you're going to have to do the, taking action on the plan. Again, this has been Killing Lincoln by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard. Check it out. Thank you, fans, for listening, and thank you to all the young fans out there. I was impressed to learn about this year's wrap up of the You Only podcast, and hopefully you enjoyed that little segment. Thank you so much. Until next time.